name is Christian Takatomo. I'm the curator for gaming collections at Special Collections and Archives at UNLV Libraries. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to the library today to hear a talk from our current Eadington Fellow, Hsuan. There'll be time for a Q&A at the end of the talk, and we invite you to join us after the talk for a reception. There's coffee and cookies at the back, which you can help yourself to now or after the talk. And we are recording this event, so please take this opportunity to silence your phones. At Special Collections and Archives, we preserve evidence of the history of Las Vegas and Southern Nevada and share the stories that make our region and our people unique. We collect the papers of individuals, the records of organizations, oral histories that capture the unwritten histories of people in our community, and much, much more. We preserve these collections so that they can be used to support learning, teaching, and the creation of new knowledge within our community for generations to come. If you're interested in the work of Special Collections, you can check out our blog and our social media where we post about our collections and all of the fun and illuminating things they contain. We also provide access to thousands of digitized items via our online portal. You can find links to all of this on our webpage, www.library.unlv.edu/SCA. We also have some cards at the back of the room with more information about the portal, as well as a direct link to that resource and copies of my business card. Awarded since 2007 and named for Dr. William R. Eadington, the Eadington Fellowship supports the use of the unique collections held in Special Collections and Archives to conduct scholarship on gaming or the history of Las Vegas. We offer several 2- and 4-week fellowships each year, which have brought an array of scholars to our campus. And we're actually just about to announce the next recipients of the Eadington Fellowship, so look out for that announcement. The next application cycle will begin in May, and if our collections can further your research and scholarship, or if you know somebody who's in that camp, please keep an eye out for the announcement and consider submitting a proposal or encouraging your friend to do so. And now I'm delighted to introduce our speaker. Hsuan received his Ph.D. in English and American Literature from UC Berkeley and is now a professor of English at UC Davis. He teaches and publishes in the fields of American Literature, environmental humanities, sensory studies, and critical race studies. He is the author of 5 books, including The Smell of Risk, Air Conditioning, and Olfactory World Making. His research has been supported by the National Endowment for the Humanities, the American Council for Learned Societies, the Obama Center for Transnational American Studies, and the Andy Warhol Foundation's Arts Writers Grant. In his talk today, titled Casino Atmospheres, he will discuss historical and ongoing efforts to engineer the interrelations between Las Vegas's casino environments and the climate. Please welcome Dr. Hsu.
Never know how to put the water when it's diagonal. Thanks, Christian, for that generous introduction, and thanks to Christian, Sarah, Stephanie, and everyone else who's helped me navigate the archives and special collections over the last 2 weeks. It's been a pleasure to spend some time with such a rich range of materials, and I've learned a lot from both the collections and the staff. Can everyone hear me? Great. So let me start by introducing a few concepts that orient my thinking about air conditioning and atmospheric design, which I developed in my book, Air Conditioning. These are ideas that made me interested in learning more about the history of indoor atmospheres, especially casino atmospheres in Las Vegas. The first concept is the philosopher Peter Sloterdijk's framing of air conditioning, which for him describes not only the cooling technology, but all of the processes and technologies with which designers try to quote, or not quote, but paraphrase, condition humans by conditioning the air around them. For Sloterdijk, modernity and the 20th century began with the use of mustard gas in World War I, an event that exploited the fact that people are entangled with and dependent on the air around them. Sloterdijk suggests that this idea of air conditioning has shaped countless other acts of atmospheric design, from the construction of air-conditioned homes to the use of scents in advertising and branding. He introduces a related concept, the metaphor of the bubble, to highlight how people have come to live in enclosed and carefully maintained interior climates that are in many ways, but importantly not entirely, sealed off from their surroundings. Among the most extreme examples of an air-conditioned bubble on the Strip would be Howard Hughes, whose fear of contagion led him to take up a, quote, monotonous life in the sterile, gently whirring air conditioning of the Desert Inn, its ducts cleaned often, no hint of breeze or buzz of insects disturbing the flatness, in the words of one of his biographers. The third concept that frames my research from the media studies is from the media studies scholar Nicole Starosielski, and it's thermal violence, a term that helps us think about how inequality and structural violence can manifest through thermal inequalities and the embodied effects of long-term exposures. Among other things, thermal violence and atmospheric violence more broadly draw attention to the fact that architectural bubbles aren't really separate. They have insidious effects on the air outside as well as on nearby bubbles. For example, when air conditioning's waste heat emissions, leaked chlorofluorocarbons, and energy usage exacerbate the deeply uneven effects of climate change. My research here at UNLV has sought to understand how Las Vegas, as a center of postmodern urban design and also of interior design and experiments in affective marketing, fits into the cultural history of air conditioning sketched out by Sloterdijk. As Denise Scott Brown, Robert Venturi, and Stephen Eisenhower write in their landmark 1972 study, Learning from Las Vegas, the gambling room is front and center of the hotel's interior space. Quote, the lobby is the gambling room. The interior space and the patio in their exaggerated separation from the environment have the quality of an oasis. The artificially lit, air-conditioned interiors complement and the glare and heat of the agoraphobic, automobile-sealed desert. Premised on this fantasy of an interior oasis amid a hostile environment, the urban form and leisure economy of Las Vegas are entirely dependent on air conditioning, both the technology and the broader strategy of manipulating humans by calibrating the air around them. How do casinos condition atmospheres in order to condition people's moods, perceptions, and behaviors? What kinds of stories do people tell about casino atmospheres, and how do these compare with the actual atmospheric effects of casinos, both indoors and outdoors? It's been a brief visit, so I'll just be sharing some examples, anecdotes, and ideas from the collections that have resonated with me and that I'll eventually, hopefully, pull together into some more formal written work. I'll start with some outdoor perspectives on the history of the Strip and then move to materials that focus on the design and maintenance of air at the threshold of the casino and then in casino interiors. Dissimulating the discomfort and health risks of extreme heat has a long history in Las Vegas. Decades before the city's first air-conditioned hotels, the Las Vegas Chamber of Commerce minimized the heat with rhetoric. In a circa 1917 report on the city's climate resources growth and opportunities, they explain away the intense heat. Quote, the maximum exposure occasionally reaches 110 and on June 30th, 1909 reached 116 degrees, which it also did last week, as recorded by the government thermometers. Due to the lack of humidity, the almost absolute dryness of the atmosphere, such temperatures are not productive of distress, and in fact, of very little discomfort. Heat prostrations are unknown. Work of every nature is carried on beneath the rays of the sun and then with no harm to the workers. We may claim without fear of contradiction that for health, happiness, and comfort, there is no climate which offers more than this. Air conditioning was a machine for realizing the minimization of heat that the Chamber of Commerce tried to do with probably not terribly accurate language in this early 20th century pamphlet. Although the historical phases of the Strip were oriented by very different ideals, from the rugged Western masculinity of early frontier-themed hotels, to the jackets and ties of the so-called Golden Age, to the more family-oriented themed casinos, and the recent shift toward prestige architecture, greenwash buildings, and the Manhattanization of the Strip, air conditioning has played a pivotal role throughout all of these phases. The historian Jay Brigham reports that in the 1960s, for example, the city's power usage was nearly 300% above national per capita electrical consumption, and users in Las Vegas paid half the national average cost per kilowatt hour. In 1960, 38.7% of Las Vegas homes had air conditioning, 3 times the national level. By 1980, those figures were 95% of Vegas homes and 54% of American homes. While Brigham's focus is on homes, I'd argue that the casino resorts have been especially influential in positioning American air conditioning as a luxury and comfort amenity rather than as a public health technology or a human right, framings that are becoming increasingly urgent as climate change presents more intense and deadly heat waves. One thing I learned from the historical research was the important role of dam workers as early patrons of the leisure economy, leading to the construction of the El Rancho Resort, which opened in 1941 as the first hotel located outside downtown and the city's first fully air-conditioned resort. One air conditioning historian reports that El Rancho's air conditioning units consisted, quote, of large ice machines. This system had a capacity of 60 tons of refrigeration per day and a circulation of 22,000 cubic feet per minute of filtered air properly humidified or evaporated as occasions demanded. Oh, sorry, I wanted to show you just a blueprint of HVAC renovations at the El Rancho. I did not get the year on this, unfortunately, but it's at the archive. The El Rancho was known for its Western-style windmill, recognizable from a distance to visitors in automobiles. Its blades were lined with neon. But as the urban studies scholar and architect Stefan Al explains, the iconic windmill was a facade, not a working windmill that drew water from the ground and drew energy from the weather, but a container for the resort's air conditioning equipment, which made its own indoor weather, while at the same time contributing emissions to outdoor climate change. I'd suggest that this could be the origin of Jean Baudrillard's often cited concept of the hyperreal, a condition in which it's increasingly difficult or irrelevant to distinguish between reality and its simulation. What if vernacular postmodern architecture, the neon signs of Brown, Venturi, and Isinor's famous decorated sheds, which is just a block building with a sign or a kind of like decoration, the indexical forms of their ducts, buildings that look like things, such as windmills, and the strip's innovation in fictive theme design originates from the structure that camouflages air conditioning at the same time that it poses as a windmill that's both attuned to the outdoor weather and that generates sustainable energy. We might also read the windmill as the first instance of architectural greenwashing on what is now the Strip. But even as the windmill covered the unsightly AC equipment, the hotel sign just off the street advertised that the resort was 100% air conditioned. I think you can read it there barely. It had to be both present everywhere in the space and virtually undetectable. This was just a few years after thousands of workers, many of whom helped infuse the city's casinos with much needed capital, suffered from extreme heat, including regular, easily preventable heat-related illnesses and many deaths, while building Hoover Dam, which would power the city's growth, including its growing air conditioning usage between 1931 and 1936. The air conditioning machinery hidden in plain sight at the Strip's original hotel suggests that we should put air conditioning at the center of discussions of Las Vegas architecture and design. It's not an afterthought that was added to casinos, but an essential part of what has made the Strip feel comfortable and appealing, not to mention habitable. While advertising air or blowing air conditioning out the entrances of buildings to lure passerby inside was not invented in Las Vegas, one of its most extravagant examples was. In 1959, the Lucky Strike Bingo Hall introduced the air curtain, a wall of cold air that could seal cold air inside a casino without using walls or doors. With a sign inviting pedestrians to walk through the air curtain, the Lucky Strike offered extravagant cooling as a luxury, what Stefan Al describes as, quote, a quintessential modern experience. Al adds that, quote, Las Vegas's sign, sound, and air conditioning systems drew so much heavy voltage that it exhausted the city's supply from Hoover Dam. City leaders had to leave the Nevada source to tap into the New Mexico gas fields in 1960. To add to the supply, they built coal-burning plants in southern Nevada, which became the primary energy resource, the first of which burned 1,050 tons of coal a day, end quote. Like the overheated workers who constructed Hoover Dam, coal miners working deep underground are often exposed to prolonged extreme heat, along with poorly ventilated toxic air. Here too, following the energy and extractive labor that fuel its air conditioners beyond the Strip reveals far-reaching pathways of thermal violence. If the air curtain appeals to the curiosity and overheated bodies of pedestrians outside the casino, by the same token, the desert heat can make it difficult to leave the comfort of an air-conditioned resort. In the opening chapters of the 1978 novel Fools Die by Mario Puzo, best known for The Godfather, a character named Jordan Hawley steps outside a casino resort with all his winnings on what we're told is the luckiest day of his life. Quote, under the blazing Nevada sun, a dozen Xanadu's glittered with million-watt neon signs. The hotels seemed to be melting down into a steely golden haze, a reachable mirage. Jordan Hawley was trapped inside the air-conditioned casino with his winnings. It would be madness to go out to where only other casinos awaited him with their strange unknown fortunes. Here he was a winner, soon he would see his friends. Here he was shielded from the burning yellow desert. Jordan is stuck just past the threshold of his air-conditioned bubble, unwilling to leave its protection from the sweltering desert heat, especially since all that's out there on the Strip are a dozen other air-conditioned hotels. But Puzo stresses that there's an important distinction between comfort and well-being. Soon after the scene, Jordan commits suicide after winning $500,000 at a baccarat table. By contrast, the writer and novelist John Gregory Dunn's 1974 memoir, Vegas, A Memoir of a Dark Season, concludes with the author finally breaking away from the city's, quote, air-conditioned spell. Now it's the quote. When I got to my apartment, the time was 1:33 and the temperature still 98. This is on the big thermometer clock at the Sahara that he can see from his window. For the first time, the clock on the Sahara did not remind me of death. I recall turning off the air conditioner and opening the windows and sleeping 14 hours bathed in sweat as if after fever. While this scene doesn't take place in a casino, it importantly suggests that reconnecting with the external environment, at least when the heat is not dangerously intense, can be as liberating as it is uncomfortable. Of course, it's also important to keep in mind that when it comes to spending time in air-conditioned spaces or exposed to the actual climate, not everybody has a choice. If we consider the casino's interior with air conditioning in mind, we can see its quiet, taken for granted effects everywhere. In the heat of the desert, air conditioning makes it possible to cover floors in thermally inefficient carpets that create comfort and dampen casino noises. It allowed people to be comfortable wearing the thermally inefficient suits and ties of the Rat Pack era. It contributes to the casino's sense of being set apart from normal time and space by cutting casinos off from the outdoor weather and the kind of course of the sun. It constantly filters out cigarette smoke, sometimes by running at a much higher rate than necessary just for cooling the air. Increased ventilation means there's more incoming air to be heated or cooled, and that already conditioned indoor air can't be recirculated. As Edward Butera, a mechanical engineer who worked on numerous mega resort infrastructures, explains in an oral history interview, quote, you know a casino is going to have probably 2 to 2.5 cubic feet per minute of air per square foot based on the load in the casino, but you're going to have to provide 3 to 4 CFM a square foot of 100% outside air because of the cigarette smoking aspects. If I'm reading that right, that means that the right to smoke in casinos is a kind of atmospheric contradiction. Many visitors insist on smoking, and many others perceive the smell of cigarette smoke as an important component of the casino's atmosphere. But at the same time, both health and aesthetic concerns require expending massive resources. So if I'm reading that quote right, it was up to twice the amount of air exchange and therefore up to twice the amount of heating and cooling of that exchanged air to make casino smoking safe, which is to say somewhat less deadly. The shift from the early frontier-themed resorts to the luxurious Manhattanized architecture of today's Strip has been accompanied by equally profound changes to the casino's target demographic and to its interior design. If the early and classic periods centered the heroic male risk-taker proving himself at gaming tables, the air-conditioned cowboy, to repurpose a phrase from Stefan Al, Recent casino design is preoccupied with optimizing the more gender-neutral, immersive, private, and affectively absorptive experience offered by once denigrated, once previously feminized slot machines. While air conditioning has been important for all these iterations of the casino, the slot machine calls for a more holistic approach to immersive atmospheric design that blends air temperature control with the orchestration of ambient sounds, smells, and textures. Instead of an atmospheric background for male fantasies of adventure, the casino is now designed to hold gamblers in an atmosphere of optimal comfort for as long as possible. Several academic works from the special collections helped contextualize the role of atmosphere in the interior design of casinos. In the year 2000, the casino manager and design researcher Bill Friedman published the 629-page tome, Designing Casinos to Dominate the Competition. This modestly titled book, grounded in Friedman's extensive experience as a casino manager researcher, he did field research in 80 casinos over 20 years, and a former slot machine addict, argues for an empirical and pragmatic approach to casino design that prioritizes the extraction of profit from gamblers, especially through slot machine engagement. Friedman is fixated on what he calls the gambling ambiance, a term for the various ambient design qualities that together determine, quote, how comfortable a casino is to gamble in. Where earlier resorts like Caesar's Palace were designed as grand open interiors filled with, quote, enormous, uninterrupted, barren space above the gambling equipment, Friedman claims that low ceilings and broken up overhead space make for a feeling of, quote, compactness and congregation that's more conducive to gamblers' preferences. He argues that slot machine gamblers prefer, quote, secluded, intimate gambling areas in which they can be alone in public space, interacting with the carefully calibrated sensory offerings of the environment and the machine they've chosen. Temperature is a key component of Friedman's gambling ambiance. Quote, just a few degrees too high or too low will drive people out of an area. Other works I consulted include Felicia Campbell's article, The Spell of the Sensuous, Casino Atmosphere and the Gambler, which draws on the influential sensory studies and environmental phenomenology scholar and former magician David Abrams's work, titled The Spell of the Sensuous, to study how casino atmospheres engage people's embodied responses. And also an article by UNLV Ph.D. researchers and industry consultants Carl Meyer and Leslie Johnson titled A Customer-Based Assessment of Casino Atmospherics. The 2012 monograph, Addiction by Design, by anthropologist Natasha Dow-Schul, synthesizes many of these studies while tracing how casinos' atmospheric engineering engages and extracts profit from visitors' affect. When you tell people you're in Las Vegas to research casino atmospheres, they'll often make a vague, knowing reference to the practice of pumping oxygen into casinos to keep gamblers awake and energized. It turns out this is an urban legend drawn from fiction, Mario Puzo's novel again, in which around 2 a.m. in the morning, the ruthless casino owner Gronevelt, quote, made his special call to the building engineer to pump pure oxygen through the casino air conditioning system to keep the gamblers from getting sleepy. Vast quantities of outdoor air, often more than would be needed solely for heating or cooling, are pumped into casinos to control ambient odors, especially cigarette smoke. What casinos do diffuse throughout their windowless spaces, however, is just as calculated as pure oxygen. The designer scents pumped throughout hotel lobbies and casino floors are intended for atmospheric branding and behavioral modification. With names like Empire, Caesar's Palace, and Pacific Breeze, Empire's at Caesar's Palace and Pacific Breeze is at the Station Casinos, these scents were introduced after an experiment by the psychiatrist and neurologist Alan Hirsch showed that introducing a, quote, floral scent, he never published the ingredients, to a slot machine increased the amount of money gambled by 45%. That research was done in 1991, published in 1995. Jim Redding, who designed most of the resort's scents, told me in an interview that the earliest use of non-consensual scents at a resort was at Monte Carlo in 1996. While the scent notes featured in the Wynn's popular Asian lily scent were, according to Redding, the scent's designer, intended to complement the specific plants in the Wynn's flower displays. Oh, there it is. It's already up there. They also prominently feature the florals that Hirsch had shown to be effective in eliciting gamblers' engagement. In addition to behavioral modification, another important motive for resort scents is the control or suppression of malodors. A 1992 novel by Edward Allen, which I don't at all recommend reading, offers this description of unsuccessfully deodorized casino spaces. The description's interesting, though. There's a particular smell that a casino has, not clean, yet not dirty either, deodorized, its basic component being cigarette smoke, but with the ashtray stink filtered out of it, the tobacco smell mixed up with 100 other substances, cocktails, carpet deodorant, sweat, perfume, halitosis, but everything got processed and blended and softened into something very general, something warm and round and lived in. It's an odor that exists nowhere else, and it's the same in every casino. The air of the posh Caesar's Palace, scarcely distinguishable from the cheapest quarter crap table joint on Fremont Street. Whether or not this is accurate, this perception that the Caesar's Casino smells indistinguishable from a cheap downtown dive is precisely what casinos seek to counteract by jacking up their HVAC beyond normal ventilation standards and by diffusing bespoke scents. While this conjunction of ventilation, deodorization, and fragrance may make for pleasant smelling air, casinos can't completely remove malodors and air pollutants. In her Occupational Health History of Las Vegas, Michelle Turk describes a vast range of indoor and outdoor air pollutants that disproportionately affect workers in Las Vegas. She writes, quote, "The most hazardous indoor air pollutant in the resorts was secondhand smoke. As most of the nation banned indoor smoking, the Strip became a haven for smokers." Turk explains that, quote, "Even a well-ventilated casino contained metabolized nicotine levels 300 to 600% higher than in other smoking workplaces. And that, quote, dealers, especially dealers, waitresses, and security guards were most affected by secondhand smoke," end quote. Atmospheric design in casinos has continued to shift with the times. While conventional wisdom was oriented by what gaming historian David Schwartz characterizes as the casino prime directive to, quote, "keep patrons near their slots," 21st century resorts have been shifting away from design principles intended to hold gamblers in the casino. For example, Steve Wynn broke the rule against allowing natural light in casinos when he included a 90-foot high glass dome in the design for the Mirage. This allowed the resort to house a broader set of plants, a combination of living jungle plants and orchids, and over 20,000 square feet of fake plants that included mummified trees, quote, "injected with formaldehyde and twisted into impossible shapes." That's quoting Stefan Al. Wynn later explained that in including light and living plants in the casino, quote, "I was trying to appeal to women." Wynn's frequent collaborator, the interior designer Roger Thomas, explains how a high-stakes slot room at Steve Wynn's Encore Las Vegas resort breaks many of the behavioralist casino design principles endorsed by William Friedman, discussed previously. Slot machines with payouts, this is a quote, "up to $25,000 enjoy a garden room atmosphere in what was originally a nightclub space at the Wynn Las Vegas. The Golden Lotus fountain and seating and lounge area with a garden surround are the last things guests expect to find when playing slots," end quote. Wynn's luxury properties, along with other new Manhattanized strip resorts like the Cosmopolitan, opened in 2010, have shifted revenue models away from the casino somewhat, showing that restaurants, clubs, beverages, spas, and other luxury offerings can outperform gaming. As Cindy Allen, editor-in-chief of Interior Design, writes of Wynn and Roger Thomas, quote, "Their initial groundbreaking move was to focus the design more on elevating the guest experience and less on maximizing casino revenue. Jim Redding explained to me that scents are now more subtle, both because resort branding is now more important than time on slot machines, and because fewer gamers are smoking, and so there's less ambient cigarette smoke that needs to be masked. Although it's important to note, I think that a casino scent designer is unlikely to tell you that they're designing scents to brainwash people. But atmospheric design and the manipulation of affect continue to play vital roles in resort design. In an oral history interview, the interior designer Lee Cagley, pictured here, explains, Steve Wynn, because of his approach, he's one of the few clients that we've ever worked with that will say, okay, I walk in the door, how do I feel? That's his question. It's not what do I see, it's how do I feel? Then what have you done to make me feel that way? Then I take 10 steps. Now how do I feel? I take 15 steps more. How do I feel? How far do I have to go before you change the way that I feel? Cagley goes on to discuss a range of design elements, including lighting, smell, color, materials, and ceiling height that influence people's feeling in a space, but he dwells on the vital role of HVAC infrastructures for moving air. Quote, those HVAC guys are the unsung heroes of Las Vegas, in my view. Today, as the Strip's most prestigious buildings have shifted to green energy, we're in an ambivalent moment where many resorts claim to be, quote, leading the way in the energy transition while continuing to expend massive quantities of electricity and other resources, including in their own now more efficient smart HVAC systems. At the Palazzo, Stefan L. reports that, quote, cool air was more efficiently distributed through a base underneath the slot machines rather than from the ceiling where it would waste energy on cooling empty space. In an oral history interview, the engineer Edward Butera explains how mega resorts have been installing cooling towers that leverage the dry air's capacity to absorb moisture to produce cool water and then gets circulated in coils that cool the air, although this kind of evaporative cooling does use a lot of water, and I believe at least some of those towers have been prohibited since. On the other hand, these green projects underwrite more intense levels of consumption. Butera notes that despite the adoption of sustainable HVAC, casinos will always be, quote, energy hogs. I meant of sustainable energy. Casinos will always be energy hogs. And the Strip's luxury-oriented atmospheric engineering has spread far beyond the casino to other attractions that now play a comparable role in generating revenue. The Sphere, which literally takes the form of an air-conditioned bubble, consumes up to 28 megawatts at peak energy usage, which is enough power to power 21,000 homes. While 70% of the Sphere's energy usage is sourced from solar, the remaining 30% would still be enough to power 6,300 homes. And the Fontainebleau Spa features a snow room, or a snow shower, cooled to negative 14 degrees Fahrenheit, according to Forbes, with a, quote, heated floor that keeps your toes nice and toasty and melts the snow as it lands. A recent UN report projects that cooling will account for up to 10% of greenhouse gas emissions globally by 2025. But energy expenditure may not be the most harmful effect of air conditioning, especially if the Strip casinos continue to transition to renewable energy. Perhaps an even more damaging effect of the air-conditioned bubble is what geographer Hannah Della Bosca calls embodied climate change, which holds a privileged and influential sliver of the global population in an anesthetizing atmosphere of comfort that makes the lived and felt effects of climate change seem far away and barely imaginable, like a mirage. That's it.
Time for questions, and I think we've got some mics that we can pass around. Anyone want to start? And please introduce yourself first.
Sorry about that. Thank you. So, Sarah Quigley, Director of Special Collections, thank you so much for your presentation. This is a fascinating topic. I'm curious if any of your research so far has dealt with things like signature scents in a current context where we're talking more about sensory experiences and how they might impact customers negatively through allergies or sensitivities that might create sort of physical discomfort.
Yeah, thanks. I have not gotten too much into that. I think most of the research on scent, just because I was in Las Vegas, was interviewing Jim Redding, who designed the scents, and he did talk about how the scenting of casinos, at least from his in his account, began in 1996. Not he didn't mention the casino study, with the 45% increased revenues. But rather that fragrance kind of practices had gotten to where they were able to remove VOCs from the components of these scents, and they could do this very safely. And that his company, Aroma Retail, which if you're interested in these scents, I'd highly recommend visiting. They're great, and they have all of these scents you can kind of smell. They have candles based on the different casino scents. But that they use all kind of hypoallergenic ingredients. I think that, I got the sense that there are complaints and a lot of people who do feel kind of overwhelmed by some of the scents. And of course, there are people with chemical sensitivity or, scent response is partly subjective. So people could feel very sensitive to these smells and be reacting even if they're hypoallergenic. So it's complicated. But yeah, I mean, I just was walking through the Wind the other day to find this room that I mentioned in the talk. And, I played the slots for a little bit and I had this really weird experience of it smelling pretty good, but I was also feeling short of breath, right, because of the cigarette smoke. So they clean it really effectively, but they can't actually remove the smoke. Yeah, Jim Redding actually explained to me that the best way to deal with cigarette smoke and other bad smells is not to just kind of cover it over with a stronger smell, right? It's to add smells that blend with it into more kind of palatable or pleasant smells. But of course, that's not removing them from the air. So yeah, I guess I would be the, the only source. I did look for sources in the collections, but I wasn't able to find any in the short time I was here. Yeah, thanks.
Hi, Sue Wainscott, engineering librarian, engineer adjacent. Have you seen any evidence that the casino industry might be pushing the technology towards more cost-efficient and resource-efficient air conditioning technologies?
Yes, I have. I mean, I didn't go into that too much, but there has definitely been a transition to, along with sourcing a lot more energy from solar, right? Technologies that incorporate cooling towers that I mentioned. There are also now hybrid cooling towers that can do dry cooling. I am not, you probably know enough about engineering to understand how that works. I don't, right? I kind of get the evaporative cooling tower where they spray water, and as the water evaporates, it's like how we sweat, it cools, but moistens the air, and then they can end up with cold water or colder water, right? That they then recirculate through coils. But yeah, so there are technologies like that. There are also very kind of computational or data-driven air conditioning systems, right? So they will kind of change according to, say, the cigarette smoke load in a space, or the amount of people I would assume in a particular space. So I think it's much, I mean, this is true for air conditioning outside of casinos as well, right? There's a lot more kind of microclimatic kind of targeting because it's much more efficient. Thanks.
Hello, my name is Jay Tanner. I'm the conservator for Special Collections. My question's maybe a little more broad. I've only lived here for about 7 months, and in that time, I've kind of become fascinated with things that are very Las Vegas specific. And so this presentation was really interesting to me. I was curious how you kind of got into that. Like, what's your background with that? What made you want to study not only this particular thing, but like some of the other related topics that you mentioned?
Yeah, thanks. So, I mean, I came to air conditioning through a kind of broad process where I was trained originally in thinking about cultural geography and like literature. I feel like I'm giving you my my intellectual life story, but then I got really interested in critical race studies, and so I started thinking about intersections of race and geography, or race and place, and probably one of the more compelling places where people have been working on that is environmental justice, right? So the way in which place, I mean, even some of the occupational health stuff that I was talking about, right? Like the dealer's location in the casino is geographic, right? And the fact that they're just like in front of these people who are smoking, they can't really take breaks, or ask the person to stop or to step outside or anything like this. And then, yeah, so that all got me interested in environmental justice and then in air pollution. And the problem of kind of like how we sense the air, and that's where like I got into sensory studies, because the air is, it's a kind of problem for environmental justice and environmentalism more broadly, because people do tend to think, even Marx, right? Like Marx and Engels, all that is solid melts into air. This idea that like if something is kind of like just sent up into the air, it's gone and we don't have to deal with it anymore, and it's not like this material that sticks with us and that we live with. And so, yeah, I guess I got interested in that question of like, how do you make the air sensible? And so smell and temperature are two ways to do that. I'm now also getting really interested in humidity. Um, yeah, and then in terms of Las Vegas, I guess I just thought that it plays a kind of outsized role, right? Everyone talks about the air conditioning in casinos. It's just, yeah, and then I didn't know about that El Rancho moment, but that just seemed like really powerful when I got to that, right? The hidden air conditioner as the like origin point of the strip. But yeah, it just seemed like a good place to, learn more about it. I'd written the book on air conditioning where I don't even remember if I mentioned casinos at all, but yeah, as kind of like paradigmatic architectural bubbles, right? That are like sealed off and extract profit by being sealed off and want to psychologically seal you off, right? All of that comes together here. And then I saw the call for the Eadington Fellowship and thought like, why not try? So I feel lucky to get to be here. Thanks.
I have a question. Do you have a sense of like when air conditioning in casinos went from being something that was like a novelty or an amenity to something that was just expected? And then I guess part two of the question, you talked a little bit about the adoption rate of air conditioning in Las Vegas. How does that compare to like the national adoption rate of air conditioning?
Yeah, thanks. So the adoption rate, I think I gave a couple comparisons. I mean, it's just like a slew of numbers, but it's just from certain years, so I don't have the entire thing. But in 1960, it was 3 times the national level. By 1980, it was 95% of Las Vegas homes versus 54% of American homes. In terms of the history, it's a great question, and I did look into this. I was looking at the photographs, trying to see, which hotels, like when you would stop seeing the 100% air conditioned, right? Because that seemed like a good way to get a sense of like it just being taken for granted. But I couldn't come up with a like definite answer to that. I would guess like 50s or 60s, which is when air conditioning became so broadly adopted like nationwide. Um, yeah, so that's probably when at least like the momentum built up for casino air conditioning to just be like expected on, especially on the strip. Yeah, thanks.
Why don't we end here? Lots of Lots of snacks in the back. If you could just stick around, if you have a question that you just like want to ask Sean one-on-one, or you want to talk to your neighbors about the talk, please stick around, have some coffee, have some cookies, and hang out with us for a little bit. Thank you so much for coming, and keep an eye out for our next Eadington Fellow announcement.
Thanks, everyone.